Hey, welcome to the Strong Roots podcast. My name is Kristen Hill, and we are so excited that you're tuning in today. Our prayer is that you would move one step closer to Jesus through this series. So go ahead and check out this next episode. Hey, Strong Roots, we are in our Parenthood season, and I'm here with Pastor John, and today we are talking about sexuality and identity. And this is one of those conversations that I feel like a lot of us try to avoid, not only with each other, but with our kids. So Pastor John's going to shoot straight with us today. So I'm going to open up with this question. How was the topic of sex dealt with in your home growing up? Is that different from how it's being dealt with in your home today? Can you please explain the differences?
And this is such an important issue in parenting. Like, I would argue that Satan uses the areas of sexual and gender identity and sex in general to destroy, steal, and kill more of the next generation than anything else. Like, it is a huge deal. Can't overstate it. But growing up, my parents were, like we are, very honest and direct, probably more so than most families would be about it. I mean, as soon as we asked about it in like kindergarten or first grade, my parents, explained sexual intercourse to me. Why does it take a mom and a dad to make a baby? Where do babies come from? And I remember asking my dad, like, how does the sperm get from the man to the woman?
Right.
And my dad very crudely explained the process, and I was like, you guys did that twice? Oh my gosh, that's so gross. But yeah, I mean, that's how we talked about it growing up, and that's how we talk about it now with our kids. Is like I said, 5 years before you think they need to hear about it, they probably need to hear about it for most things. So yeah.
Absolutely. What part of sexuality do you think is the most important conversation to have with your kids?
I think it's not a sex talk any longer. Mm-hmm. It is regular dialogue, because your kids are going to be exposed to sexual topics, inundated in so many different areas of your life. I mean, if your kids have any form of technology, they're going to hear about it. They hear about it from their classmates. I mean, my kids go to a good school, and they hear about it all the time there. They hear about it, like my kids have come back from Sunday school and said so-and-so mentioned this deal. But we make it an open topic. It's not a taboo topic in our house. And this is so critical. You don't want to act nervous when talking about sex. Society loves to talk about sex. But if you're like, every time your kids talk about it, like sweating, like, so here's what I'll tell you about it when you get older. Like, your kids are like, oh, that didn't feel good at all.
Right.
Okay? You think to yourself, what can I do to make this a positive conversation for my kids? I'm relaxed. I'm not making them feel shameful.
Right.
We're having an honest, meaningful, clear conversation that is encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Sex is great. We shared on this podcast before. Chris and I get to share that together all the time.
Right.
It's awesome. And I want my kids to have awesome sex lives. I don't want them to associate it with shame or embarrassment or anything. Mm-hmm. I just want to teach them to do it in the right context. And that's a really big deal for us.
So how do you create a no shame culture where your kids can ask you anything and feel like it's okay?
Number one,
yeah,
and this is a big deal, is avoiding trauma, or working as hard as you can to protect your kids from trauma. And this will be more of a conversation when we talk about technology next week, and that's going to be a big conversation. This podcast is going to be a little bit longer this week, but here's the thing. Average age right now, and the research is behind, so it's probably younger, but the average age of exposure to pornography is like 10 years old for boys and girls, like 8 for boys and 11 for girls. But imagine an 8-year-old boy seeing hardcore pornography on the internet. And that's way younger. And it's not just like, oh, I found a Playboy that my dad had. It's like, porn on the internet, over the course of 10 minutes, I saw 100 couples committing, like, some of them very heinous acts together.
Right.
Like, imagine if an 8-year-old boy was surrounded by 100 couples, male, female, male, female, female, people and animals, over the course of a 10-minute experience in real life. Not on the internet, but in real life. They're traumatized.
Right.
That's a traumatic experience. That boy, if that happened in real life, you'd be like, oh, like, we got to get them counseling. We got to do whatever. We got to do all this stuff. That's whatever. Like, that's awful. And keep in mind, like, the algorithms are essentially sexual predators that want your kids' eyeballs. You know what I mean? Because they know we hook them young, we keep them for a long time. I mean, it's heinous, it's villainous. that is going to make sex a very shameful conversation around our kids. And so for us, in order to keep sex where it needs to be, we are like, I would say religiously, because we love Jesus, like it is a religious devotion to protecting our kids' minds and eyes at home. We read a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and it talks about what to do if you see a bad picture. It tells our kids what bad pictures are, and essentially it creates, the whole book is designed, it's not designed to prevent your kids from seeing that. It's designed to train your kids for when they see it, how to process that trauma with their parents in a way that's not shameful. And this is so critical. All of our kids have come to us and said they've seen a bad picture. Right. Despite our devotion. We don't have screens at home. We don't have a TV. Our kids don't have access to any of it. And in spite of that, with friends, whatever, various things, they've seen it. And so that's how we create with young kids the opportunity to talk. With older kids, we have a 10-year-old. But with my dad, he didn't freak out again. Right. When I went to him and said, hey, I saw nudie pictures, and I told him, he didn't freak out. He talked to me about it. We had conversations about it. When it comes to talking to your kids about masturbation, that's hard to talk to a young kid about that, and for some of our kids, that's been something that came up way earlier than we expected, way earlier, when they were toddler aged. And that's a conversation that you need to open up with your kids. And for us, that's super awkward. You know what I mean? We called our doctor and we're our pediatrician, we're what is happening? What do we do? And she gave us great advice. She said, your kid has discovered a new toy and you need to begin having conversations with your kid about that based on how you want to shape your kid's future. So we've had conversations with our kids about that. And I would argue that all parents, even if you got young kids, for us it started as early as 3 years old where we've had to talk about that with some of our kids.
But I feel like every single one of our kids has found ooh, this tickles, or ooh, this feels good. I feel like every parent, you have opportunities to talk about it.
Whatever makes my pee-pee tingle. Yeah. That's a conversation you have with little kids. And fortunately, they feel free enough to have that conversation with us. But as parents, we need to begin having calm, productive, wonderful conversations with our kids when they're ready to have them, which for pretty much all of our kids, in one way or another, it started at the age of 3.
Yeah.
For their sexuality and helping them cultivate that identity. And I think it's our job as a parent to shape it. Every one of our kids, all my daughters have said, I feel like a boy at different times. And my son has said, I feel like a girl at different times. And shaping that, helping them identify, this is what God made you to be, regardless of how you feel about it. And this is whatever. And if you have more feelings like that, talk to me about it. Right. Let's have conversations about your sexual identity. What's interesting is people born before 1941, less than 1% identify as, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning, less than 1%. And, with boomers, it was 2%. With Gen X, it was 4%. With millennials and Gen Z, it's considered as high as 28%. Wow. And at that point, we obviously, and this is, from Bill Maher, who just recently talked about that, but at that point, obviously there's something societally that's doing that. Why are more than a quarter of all babies being born in the wrong bodies? Why is it regional? Why is it that this is so much more prevalent in parts of the country? And, if gender dysphoria disappears from 70% of kids who profess to have it, 70%, it just goes away with aging. It no longer stays. Why are we advocating for irreversible hormone treatments for young kids that for 70% of them, it's going to go away? Right. That's a big trauma. So anyway, ultimately what it comes down to, and the reason why I think it's become so prevalent, is because parents have been trained not to train their kids in this. And it is a parent's job to help direct and train and develop our kids' sexuality. And the way we do that is through healthy conversations rooted in the gospel. This is what redeemed sex looks like. It's given to God by us to bond one another together in the context of marriage and to procreate. And that's a really cool thing that God gave to us. And, with all of our kids, we've had conversations about mom and dad's sex life. Because they've asked us, how often do you guys do it? It's every day. And that's good. We want them to know that, this is something that you can look forward to that's really healthy. But, part of the reason your mom and dad have that is because of choices we made to honor God with our relationship, with dating, with different things in our life. And we certainly weren't perfect. I wish we were better. But I want my kids to have the very best marriage possible, the very best sex life possible when they're married. And to do that, we have to have conversations about it. Healthy, godly conversations. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from all of this is healthy, godly conversations about sex with your kids. And then regarding their gender, healthy, godly conversations. My brother, go ahead.
I know I've had conversations with people who say, I want to preserve my child's innocence, so I'm not going to have these conversations till they're way older. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that? Because I feel like there could be that's great for them, but man, they totally just rob their kids of an innocent childhood because of them. Yeah. What would you say to that?
I would say that is just like saying, I want to preserve my child's innocence, so I'm not going to potty train them.
Right?
You know what I mean? There is a time to potty train a kid. When do you start potty training a kid? 2, 3 at the latest? You know what I mean? That's it. And same with this. Their sexual identity is developing at the age of 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. I remember my brother loved dolls and purses. And he's always been effeminate. He identifies as a same-sex attracted Christian man in a heterosexual relationship to honor God with his life. Super happy. One of the most, satisfied, brilliant marriages around. They're doing great. They're raising great kids. He's married to a woman. It's all good. But I remember my mom and dad helping my brother develop his sexual identity and helping me do the same thing.
Right.
We had conversations about this is what that means. I was totally open with them about the girls I liked and, why I liked them and, what parts of character or beauty were worth focusing on. And, my mom and dad were quick to identify, hey, she's a vain woman. Mm-hmm. Not Kristen, but, some other girls I like, they're vain. You don't want to be attached to that. You don't want to be rooted in that. And if you're saying, hey, I want to protect my kid's innocence, what you're saying is, I don't want to parent. I want to abdicate my parental responsibility. You're saying parenting's about my joy, right? Because why do you want to protect their innocence? Well, you just want to enjoy being with them and you don't want to have awkward conversations.
Right.
Look, I don't want to spank my kids, but I do it because I know it's going to help them turn out great.
Right.
Everybody's like, well, the data says if you don't spank your kids. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that all the data says that Gen Z is not doing awesome. You know what I mean? The greatest generation, they did okay. They did all right. They did good.
Right.
So yeah, as a parent, as a godly parent rooted in Scripture, hey, the Word says, spare the rod, spoil the child. Mm-hmm. And a father who loves his child disciplines his child. And I love my children, so I'm going to train them up in the way they should go. And parents, please, for the love of God, for the love of the gospel, and for the love of your kids, train your kids sexually. It's a God-given mandate. And I think really it starts probably by the time your kid's 3 at the latest.
Right.
And is going to continue into adult life.
Right.
And, my mom and dad still talk about sex with me. Well, more so my dad. But we still talk about sex. That's still something that's a part of, hey, this is whatever. And I'm so grateful for it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So what would be the challenge you'd leave for them at the end of this?
Well, I'll say, parents, it is your job to train up your children in the way they should go. Mm-hmm. And that covers sexual and gender identity as well. And that's a huge deal. And if you have kids that come to you and say, I'm not cisgendered,
yeah,
I would encourage you to first off take a look back and say, have I been training them? Because in all likelihood, they're not in all likelihood, but it's very possible that you probably haven't been training them.
Right.
And recognize, hey, we need to begin training. It's late in the game, but we need to begin training and preparing for this is who God is calling you to be. And I think the reason why my brother in particular, who would probably have in another family said, I'm not cisgendered, turned out great the way that he did, is because he had parents who trained him. And I know that it's my job, your job, our job, to raise up the next generation as godly, gospel-centered, Jesus-fearing people submitted to and conform to the image of God in every area of our life.
Amen. I totally agree. And thank you so much for tuning in today. And I'm excited to continue the rest of the season with you. Bye. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us on our other social media platforms. We don't want you to miss out on any future content. Thank you so much again, guys. I hope you have a great day. And I want you to know I am personally praying that your roots stay strong.